This is A World on Purpose.
A purposeful life is the most important kind and the most valuable kind of life.
Every choice that we make makes a difference, for better or worse.
I loved walking in a village and seeing the before and after.
This is the podcast dedicated to those humans choosing to live larger by working for the greater good. And these are their stories. Stories of hope and of true change that come from living on purpose.
What if you were to suddenly say there are no challenges, there are only opportunities?
Regardless of where you come from, your financial identity should determine where you end up in life.
I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and my hope is that my inspiring guests will take you on an introspective journey that helps you tap into your own pivot to purpose, bringing greater meaning to your life. Welcome to A World on Purpose. What do you get when an architect and systems thinker meets a beautiful visual storyteller and they both share the same passion and belief that water is the planet's most precious resource? You get one powerful couple working together to drive innovation that could very well be the next solution to the globe's water crisis. Listen as Laura-Doss Hertz and David Hertz, founders of skysource.org, describe how their individual careers combined together influence their brilliant idea to solve water scarcity and create a more sustainable energy system overall. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A World on Purpose. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and today is going to be a really fun day. As you know, on A World on Purpose, we love to bring you the most exciting, inspirational, provocative, interesting humans that are out there doing incredible work in purpose. Sometimes they're actually attached with some kind of nonprofit or something that they're supporting, and sometimes the purpose is inherent in the actual product that they're making. And today is going to be one of those examples. I'm here with some very wonderful dear friends of mine, Laura-Doss Hertz and David Hertz, who are the co-founders of SkySource, and I'm going to let them tell you all about it because it's always much more exciting for the innovators to tell you in their own words. So welcome today, Laura and David, to A World on Purpose as my esteemed guests. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having us. We're so delighted to be here and so honored to be in front of you. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm honored, and I love seeing you two in your element, in your amazing home at the Xanadu, as you guys call it. You want to tell people where you're coming from today?
Yeah, we're coming from SkySource Ranch in Xanadu up in the Santa Monica Mountains overlooking the Point Mugu State Park.
One of my favorite places on the planet. As you guys know, I was in LA and Venice alongside you guys for almost 20 years. I recently moved back to Napa Valley, which is why we have a new background back here. So I do miss the Santa Monica Mountains, but what you guys created up there is pretty extraordinary. It's magical, and I'm just so happy you guys are broadcasting live from there. So we are going to talk today about your incredible innovation with SkySource and the amazing WEDEW machine that came out of this kind of idea that you guys had around collecting water from air. And so I'm just going to give people a little bit of a background quickly, but I'd really like you guys to tell in your own words your origin story and your pivot to purpose. But you're both co-founders of SkySource, and Laura, you're the Chief Impact Officer, and David, you're the president currently, and also president of a studio of environmental architecture because you're an architect. So we're going to talk about how that background actually played into this amazing innovation that you guys created. You're also the awesome winners of the 2018 XPrize, which we're going to definitely dive deep into because that's a pretty extraordinary thing. For people who don't know what the XPrize is, I'm going to let Laura and David tell you that. And out of all of that too, you guys do amazing, amazing work besides being incredible people with backgrounds in photography and advertising and architecture. You also give a lot of your time to local organizations, especially in Los Angeles, especially water related, which is not a surprise to me. Bay Foundation, Heal the Bay, urban farms as well in the communities. And so I'm going to let you guys tell people a little bit about, for anyone who's been listening to this show for a while now, we talk about your origin story and what we like to call your pivot to purpose. When you realized that everything that you were doing in your life was really more about an intention towards doing good for humanity and something larger than yourself. So why don't you two start, and which one of you would like to start?
You.
Okay.
David will start.
I've been volunteered to start.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm an architect. I've been practicing for 37 years, but my origin story actually started when I was a little kid, and I had severe childhood eczema, which really plagued my childhood, and I found that the only solace that I could get from this irritation was the ocean. And so I always found water to be an incredibly healing, especially the ocean. And that began a life of surfing and engaging with the ocean and becoming an environmentalist around the Santa Monica Bay in particular, because I watched it become a pristine kind of wilderness to somewhat of an open cesspool for the city of Los Angeles before there was a regulatory environment and an awareness about our impacts. And at some point I had to rationalize my place in the world, starting off as an environmentalist and being fascinated by architecture and the built environment, because of course the built environment can be destructive on the natural. And so my purpose became, how do I lessen the impacts on the natural environment within the built environment, and became a leader over the last 37 years in looking at that, helping to be a co-founder, early adopter in the U.S. Green Building Council, and ways in which we revise our buildings, and actually moving from sustainability into regenerative architecture that give back. And that's how it came about with water, which you can speak more about.
That's fantastic. Laura, do you want to share yours? And then we can also talk about what I would love to know is how you guys met, because whenever I interview a couple, we have to ask that question too. But before you do that, let's hear about your origin story.
Sure. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, surrounded by water. So growing up, all my activities as a youth was sailing, swimming, a lot of water sports. And so what really, I mean, I was just always aware of nature, but what really did it for me was I was probably about 7, and there was this commercial on TV, and it was just this pile of garbage, and they were just showing like vignettes of all this trash piled up in like riverways and lakes, and there was a guy on like a mountain ledge, and they zoom in on him, and he turns around, and it's a Native American, and he's got a tear. It still is so profound to me, because that changed everything, my perspective on environmentalism. And I think part of the most powerful thing for me is that I felt like I didn't have any power to make a change. And so I just kind of wandered through life, with, working and honing my professional skills, but always going, one day I'm going to figure it out. And so I did a lot of volunteer work and just trying to figure out how do you do this environmental thing and make a difference and make an impact. And it wasn't until I met David where I learned that the smallest thing that you do is the most profound. And so that's where I started. I started from the very beginning, learning about sustainability and how to make a difference, in the world as just one small individual. Mm-hmm. So here I am now, I've come a really long way, and I feel more emboldened and more empowered than ever. And I just want to be able to teach people that it's overwhelming. Where do I begin? And that you can be anyone from any walk of life and be able to make an impact or make a difference.
Yeah, and we're going to definitely talk more about that later when we get into, you guys in part 2 or part 3, when we talk about how you guys started developing SkySource and all of the challenges, that came along with it, both for you individually, as a couple, as a business. Those are very real things that happen when you're trying to, in any walk of life, but especially when there's a purpose or impact part of it. Let's go back a little bit to David, both of you, your career paths were very interesting. Obviously, when you met, you came together, and I just find that so synergistic and symbolic that the two of you had already had so much passion around water as a topic. But you also had two different trajectories in your life. David, you in architecture, which was sustainable building, obviously had some water components to it. And Laura, you with your background in advertising and photography. Talk a little bit about how those career paths for you, if you could. David, why don't we start with you with architecture, the kind of impact you made in your, I mean, I've seen some of the homes that you've designed and built, and they're magnificent and also like the pinnacle of sustainability. So, and then Laura, your photography was just something else, all the work you did for Associated Press and all those amazing organizations. I want to have people understand a little bit about that before and how that influenced you guys and was able to support you in this work that you took on with SkySource.
Well, I mean, it's really a wonderful union in meeting because we're both very creative and we both have a similar aesthetic and a shared passion, especially for the environment and for social causes. So, I think that if anything, there was a kind of a magnifying effect that we responded because Laura is so amazing in the way in which she was able to use her journalism background and then her photography skill sets to kind of create lifestyles, and evocative things that were, designed within the frame of consumerism to get people to buy products. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I think speaking for you, at some point, there was a point at which you just felt like you were part of the problem of consumerism. And so how do we use the skill sets to try to really address something? And I just turned 60, Laura's in her, 20s. But it's about how do we kind of leave the planet better than we found it. Mm-hmm. And using our experience, my experience as an architect, is that I'm really a generalist in a way. I work with a lot of experts, a lot of specialists, and I try to look at the world with a systems thinking, mm-hmm. much in the way that nature works as a system. These are not disparate individual components; they're part of a whole system that can either be out of sync, where there's a causality that's creates a cascade of negative benefits, negative feedback loops into the system, or a series of positive feedback loops. And I think part of that is understanding, not only systems and buildings or buildings themselves, but the context of buildings in this larger context within its climate, its region, but then even expanding out to, looking at our planet as the only known living thing in the universe, and as Buckminster Fuller called it, spaceship Earth. I mean, there is no away. I mean, everything is here. Just because our resources seem infinite, what we realize is that there really are not infinite. They're really finite, and that image that really impacted Laura early on of the crying American, really realizing that if we throw our trash away, it has an effect. Mm-hmm. And of course, again, buildings have profound effects in everything from mining and extraction and transportation and ongoing maintenance. So could we actually make a building that gives back more than it takes over its life? And that's really what I've been focusing on. But being in Southern California, what I realized is that we can't really solve the water issue because we're in a perpetual drought. Water is transported long distances at great cost of energy, and we can conserve, with our fixtures and so forth than we should. We can collect as much rainwater when we get it, but we have changing weather patterns that are unpredictable. And, if we look at this from a scarcity model, a water scarcity model, which is real, that's one frame. But we could also look at it from an abundance model if we think that we're working correctly within nature. And what we started to look at is that there's, even though water on the planet, is fascinating. I mean, it came here from outer space. It's the same amount of water. It doesn't really go anywhere. It changes its state. But in its state from a liquid to a vapor, the entire ocean and all plants evapotranspire into vapor. And even though there's only 1% of all water on the planet is drinkable or potable water, that's the scarcity model. The abundance model says, well, there's 6 times more water in vapor form at any given time than all the rivers on the planet. And it's exactly where you need it at the point of source, not transporting it long distances. And so that's how we got fascinated by the idea. The question is, how do you harness it? How do you harness that efficiently?
Right. And that's such a great background, and it will help people understand, I think, to understand that side of your mind when you get into talking about SkySource and the design of the WEDEW machine, because you really architected that whole process, which is pretty brilliant. And then Laura, from your side of it, I would love you to talk a little bit about how your background tied into it, because when you guys actually applied for XPrize, as a photographer and a storyteller, to be able to marry those two things together, architecture and systems with storytelling and the creative side is really powerful. And I think people would love to know about that part of your life and how that, helped you influence when we get into what we're going to talk about, which is this amazing SkySource machine and the WEDEW machine, which we're going to tell people what that means in the next segment. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's really powerful how you two, married those two things together.
Sure. It's funny because you kind of think that when I was pretty advanced in my career. I mean, I'd been working as an advertising photographer, started out as a photojournalist. So I'd been in this mode of just like very one-dimensional, directional thinking about my career and, focusing, really hard on being successful and just getting to the next level without kind of seeing all the skills that I was picking up along the way. And I wasn't aware of the invaluable skills that I actually had in order to pull all this off with SkySource. And as a partner, with this XPrize venture that we were on, I basically went into this going, what the hell do I know? Like, I don't know anything. I'm not a scientist. And this is the thing that is so cool about what we're doing is that, I'm just a regular person. I don't have a degree in engineering or science, but you don't have to. If you have a passion and a mission, you can be a really, really invaluable part of the mechanism to make the change, to make a change where we can all work together and move forward and kind of break broken systems that are just not working for us. So I saw that. And so I thought, okay, well, what skills do I have? And immediately it was these incredible production skills, working under pressure, working long hours, understanding that you may have to work 24 hours. You may not get a lot of sleep. You may be eating not very well. You may not get to work out. You have to focus and be dedicated. And I think the reason that I was so successful in my career is because I valued all those things. I understood that you can't get ahead if you don't make certain sacrifices. So the first thing I did was I was willing to sacrifice, a pretty cushy existence to work my ass off. And so that was the first thing. The second thing was that I had this incredible experience of doing production work and understanding how things work and how they don't work, and when they don't work, how to fix them. What's the workaround? Finding solutions, with no information. And so that was a skill that really helped us a lot, as far as like logistics and finding products and dealing with, a lot of people that just kind of were not really understanding what we were doing. So having to be patient and having to explain, what I needed and how to get what I needed how to make friends with people that, don't want to be friends with me. And so I used a lot of those skills to really help support the cause.
That's great. Well, knowing you, first of all, I can't imagine anyone not wanting to be friends with you. But I understand. I mean, not everybody likes everybody, but that's kind of impossible when it comes to the two of you, especially. But that's really great, because we're gonna shortly in a little bit here wrap part 1 of our 3-part series with you. But before we go into part 2, I want to now start with all of that awesome background and everything that you guys have brought to this and this amazing pivot that you had. You created this incredible company called SkySource, and I remember many years ago. I'm going to do a little shout out to our very dear friend, Nicole Landers, who introduced the three of us. Many, Nicole, another innovator, urban farmer, amazing person. And I remember her bringing me to that little tiny, Oakwood rec center, and you guys had your machine there, and you had your little flyers, and you had your thing, and that was like the beginning. And so tell people just a little bit about what SkySource is, and just give a description of it and what we do is. And then when we go into part 2, because we're going to tease it out right now, I want you to explain to everyone like where it came from in India and how difficult it was to make and all that stuff, and then how that eventually flowed into what you created. So why don't you tell us what SkySource is and where, how you came to be?
So, as I was mentioning, we were just fascinated by how do we solve this water. We were in the bottom of a 6-year sustained drought in Southern California. My architecture practice is right on Market Street, just a couple hundred feet from the oceanfront walk. And at the time, the city had turned off all the water along the oceanfront walk. And many people didn't have access to water, which is amazing in our, evolved first world to think that we don't have access to fresh water. And so we used solar energy on my rooftop, put a generic atmospheric water generation machine in the back of our building, and then used a big steel wall with street art. We commissioned a well-known artist to do a mural, and we put a bottle filling station in the alley. And then we kind of let it work as a kind of experiment, social experiment, to see, how the word would get out. And it was very, very interesting. So the SkySource was then born. It kind of means, the source, water being the source, but also that water is obviously coming from the sky. But it also, skysource.org is our entity, and it kind of is sourcing everything under the sky that's related to sustainability. And under that came the WEDEW and
XPrize.
Came XPrize and also our Resilience Lab and our 501c3 nonprofit Resilience Foundation. And these are all ways in which we're able to take the kind of verticals that come about through climate changing technology, because we're both very aware. I've been teaching for the last 35 years on ecology and architecture, teaching studios at Yale, working at UCLA and USC and SCIARC and other schools. And I've been trying to help students understand the impacts that buildings have. Mm-hmm. But as I mentioned, we're not really able to do that with water in buildings. Mm-hmm. And so if we can start making our buildings, we can take light, we can make energy, it's amazing, mm-hmm. right? Our roof, we could grow things, we could, ultimately make a building give back more than it takes, but we can't do that with water, especially in Southern California and many regions. Mm-hmm. So if buildings can actually generate water, create water from water vapor in the air, and make more than they consume, then they're giving back. That's restorative. And that's what we started to do. We started to shift from scarcity to an abundance model where we actually had too much water, where water we felt this was very much an exercise in the democratization of the commons. Mm-hmm. That the idea that water is a fundamental human right It shouldn't be commoditized by large corporations that take the public trust and put it to us in little plastic bottles, sell it to us at tremendous profits where there's more plastic and marine debris than plankton in their oceans. That's a model which is badly broken and is not going to survive for the future.
Right.
And so we started with the democratization of water, giving water away for free to the community, and then we still had more water, and that's how we got involved with Community Healing Gardens and Nicole, because we saw that they had 80 urban farm boxes in the Oakwood section of Venice, and no one was adopting them because they didn't want to pay the water fines. And we reached out to her in our community, seeing these boxes. What a great idea, but it's sad that no one's watering them. We might have a solution to your water problem. And then we worked with Safe Place for Youth to take kids aged out of the foster care system to come be the water catchers, pick up the water and water the gardens. So that started up a kind of cascade of what we call a virtuous cycle, where you start having, job creation. You're creating water, but you're creating jobs, you're feeding people, there's educational component, there's a societal component.
And community building. I mean, to watch, it was interesting because when we set up the water in the alley at our office, we had no idea what was going to happen. We had no idea. And from that little tiny experiment, it was an explosion of all these possibilities that we didn't even foresee, and just actually bringing the community garden to the office to get the water. We didn't see that until we actually, met Community Healing Gardens and, until we were exposed to that whole thing.
Right.
And so it's amazing to me, just when I look back from this very little idea of just giving back to the community, seeing what happens, this explosion of all these incredible benefits that came out of it for the common good.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad I wanted you to tell that story, because that's, you told your own individual origin stories, but that's the origin story of SkySource. And I remember people in the alley being able to come and get water, and it's almost like an open source, which water should be, right? It's a human right. And you guys sort of brought that back into the community of Venice, which I loved. That's a great place for us to stop and wrap part one of our 3-part series with you guys, with Laura-Doss Hertz and David Hertz from SkySource. But before we go, and everyone must come back and listen to part 2 and 3, because this is where we're going to get into some really cool stuff around where this machine came from, how you guys made it modernized and sustainable and energy efficient, and then also the XPrize, which is going to be really fun to talk about, and your new Resilience Hub, Resilience Lab experiment coming up too. But before we go, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Skysource.org.
That's it? Both your emails are there?
Yeah, and our Instagram handle is @SkySourceWater.
Perfect.
And Facebook as well.
Great. And for everyone who is tuning in and you want to read more and learn more, they will also, Laura and David and SkySource information will also be on the A World on Purpose website. So please come back for part 2 and 3 of our 3-part series with Laura-Doss Hertz and David Hertz from SkySource. And I am very excited that you are here today. We'll see you soon. Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to A World on Purpose, your podcast that is all about living your life with the intention of purpose. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, as you know, and we are going into part 2 of our 3-part series with just 2 incredibly inspiring human beings that I happen to know and love, Laura-Doss Hertz and David Hertz, who are founders of SkySource. And in part 1, we talked a lot about their origin story, David being an architect, Laura being an amazing photographer in advertising, and their pivots to purpose and how the intersection of those things helped them come to this amazing place, forming this amazing company called SkySource. So welcome back, Laura and David, to A World on Purpose, part 2, your segment here. I'm so excited to get more into the nitty gritty of SkySource.
Same.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. And you're coming to us from Malibu, from your amazing place. It's so beautiful. It looks very cozy there. It makes me want to curl up and read a book.
You fantasize doing that. Yeah.
One day.
One day, yeah, I'm gonna come back and visit. I miss the ocean already. So we talked a lot about your story, and we just touched at the end of it on how SkySource came to be, your initial part of it. I'd love for you to describe now, we're going to kind of really dive in this segment into what SkySource is and how it started with I'd like you to talk about how it's, was originally manufactured in India, the difficulty of that machine because of cost and building to spec and those different things, and then how you ended up kind of coming into this incredible idea of turning it into this sustainable, energy efficient device that allowed you to go into the XPrize. So let's dive into that. Which one of you want to start and kind of give the nuts and bolts of SkySource and all that good stuff?
Let the genius take over.
No, I'll jump
You're both
in.
geniuses, though.
So the challenge is how do you extract some of this water vapor and turn it into potable water. And the general kind of state of the art of atmospheric water generators is really nothing more than a glorified air conditioner where you're using what we call the vapor compression cycle to use a compressor to do a phase change of a refrigerant. And the problem with this technology is threefold. I mean, one, it has a huge appetite for energy. Two, it requires a hot and humid climate, which doesn't always overlap where water scarcity is. And three, it uses a refrigerant, which is the number one, global drawdown culprit that we need to get rid of. And so what we did is, fueled by the Water Abundance XPrize, was to kind of address those three issues and completely rethink the way that we do atmospheric water. And as a point of reference, the Water Abundance XPrize, the XPrize is set up as a incentive prize. And the incentive prize is to address global challenges that, in their words, are audacious but achievable. And so how do you take things that are maybe nascent in their technology or awareness, and how do we seed them with an incentive prize and for an open call for entry? And so the Water Abundance XPrize was set up to try to make 2,000 liters of water in a 24-hour period from air. Had to use 100% renewable energy, and you had to do so at a cost of less than 2 cents per liter, which was a big challenge. There were over 100 teams from 27 countries to do it, and we were the only ones that were successful in meeting that goal.
Wow.
That's a little bit of background. It involved first an understanding of the existing technology in order to understand its limitations, and then using this kind of systems thinking as an architect and as a generalist to look at alternative energy sources. And so nobody could really make it work on the renewable side because the cost of solar energy blew the budget of the 2 cents per liter. Because you needed so much of it, and you only get about 5 hours of light, and then you have to store it, so you need a lot of batteries, and that became very challenging. And so I found a source that uses, it's called Biomass Gasification, and it's been around a while. The chemical process is called pyrolysis. It's simply vaporizing organic matter and liberating its volatiles. So if you think about a tree over its life, it's absorbing not only CO2, which makes it wonderful because it's symbiotic, it's creating oxygen, but it's also absorbing things like methane, hydrogen, and other very volatile components. And so when you take those materials and they're chipped up and you heat them up, the volatiles can be captured, and they're captured and sequestered from going into the atmosphere. So, we know that CO2 is over the last 160,000 years, monitoring, we've never had such high CO2 levels, and that's because of the impacts of man through the Industrial Revolution and through combusting things. and putting it into the atmosphere. And as we approach in the next 8 to 10 years, 1.5 Celsius, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you go backwards, that's the difference between the ice age. And so we have a warming pattern that is significantly altering this incredibly thin layer that, it's almost like an embryonic sac that protects our entire planet from, an incredibly inhospitable environment. We live in this remarkably equitable climate zone, and we're basically polluting it. And so what this process does is it sequesters atmospheric CO2. It uses volatiles into an engine as a gas, and its byproducts are electricity and heat. Now we can take heat and we can collide that with cold to create condensation, and we get water. We could also use heat to make refrigeration, and we can do other things with these byproducts. So this is where we have this virtuous cycle that we talked about, where we have a cascade of planet and people positive events that continue to kind of create benefits. And that's what's been so interesting about it, is that we're casting this, from trying to achieve one thing, we're getting a multiple of benefits.
Right. And so from what I recall, you've taken this machine that was a pretty big machine. How big was it originally?
Well, it's like the size of an air conditioner.
That's an air conditioner. And it was quite expensive to make, from what I recall you guys telling me when we first met, to spec in India. You couldn't really get it sent out. It wasn't like you could make them and then just have them for sale. They had to be built, right? Which was kind of an issue. So you guys took that idea and all of the limitations and created what is now called the WEDEW. And so that stands for, from what I remember, tell me if I'm right, Wood to Energy Deployable Emergency Water. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
How on earth did you come up with that name? Because it's awesome. And how did that really kind of explains, I guess, a little bit around what you're talking about with this cyclical technology and how it's sustainable. Talk a little bit about that, because that's pretty creative.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So it was on a Sunday.
An average Sunday.
Just an average Sunday. And it was a brainstorming session about what we were going to call this creation, and a lot of it too. You have to keep in mind that we didn't know the unintended consequences of all the other beneficial results of this WEDEW.
Okay.
And so we were so at the very beginning of it, and so I remember we were writing stuff down, and I was in the kitchen writing. David was in his office writing, and then all of a sudden he's like, WEDEW! And I'm like, oh my God! That's so good! What does it mean?
Drop the mic, that's it.
Exactly. I was like, I love it, because it's like we and do, and it's very kind of pedestrian, but the acronym is pretty profound, and that's exactly what it does.
Right.
It is.
Well, cool. And let's get into that now, because so you take this device that was kind of hard it was an amazing technology, collecting water from air. Like, how can anyone think that's not a good idea? It was hard to get out there because of the limitations. You guys come up with this amazing way to get around that with the energy sources from wood and biomass, and it's no carbon footprint, etc. And now you've created it in this format where you want to talk about how the idea that communities can buy this or be in this. There are grants to support them. And what this does is it creates a sustainable business and community. And could you talk about now where you want this to go? How you went through the XPrize. We're going to get a little more into that later about that process. But, going through this design so that it could be self-sustaining, what is your vision and goal to get it out there in these communities? And like, I'm presuming farmers or even, governments that have disaster relief. We've talked a little bit about that. Can you guys start touching on that somewhat?
Well, I just want to say the beauty of the WEDEW, and I'll let David get into the nuts and bolts of it, but for what we're seeing with the beauty of the WEDEW is that the implementation is endless. So, we're talking about the city of LA, for their resilience plan would be incredible. Schools, farms, they can be used as disaster relief hubs. They can be used as community empowerment centers. I mean, it's endless. And what's been really cool is as we've been introducing this product to the world, people come up with their own ideas of how it can be utilized. And that's the part that's so fun, is that there's things that we didn't even think of, you could use for hospitals. And the one thing that when there was that cyclone that happened in Africa, I believe it was about 2 years ago, I was listening to a story on NPR about this small town that ran out of places to put the bodies because they didn't have any cooling facilities. And I was like, oh my God, it does refrigeration. We can set up morgues in disaster prone areas. And so it's really endless what the implications of this incredible technology can be. But I think David can really dig into the nuts and bolts of the WEDEW and the impact.
Yeah, talk a little bit about how it would support communities or farmers, or what that looks like for somebody that might be thinking, wow, I should have this in my community. We should have this on our farm.
So if you start with the basic premise that our kind of industrial system has been based on large infrastructure, single systems that are very, very large, that require massive capital investment, that you're forced into because you have to amortize them over long periods of time, and they generally are centralized, and the energy or water is distributed long distances, with a lot of inefficiencies
and vulnerabilities.
Because if you realize that the future is going to be very different than the past with respect to extreme weather events. I mean, if you see every single thing as historic, because as we alter our planetary systems, we're having a much more extreme climate future. So you look at the vulnerability of something like Puerto Rico, one central electrical infrastructure, one hurricane with increasing frequency knocks out the whole system. It's too slow moving. Or even a government that's too slow, like Cape Town, knowing that they're going to be a drought, but being inactive because it's too slow. Yeah. So the basic premise is that we need something that is more resilient for our climate future. And resiliency comes when you have redundancy, when you have distributed systems that are hyper local. And so that was the basic premise of how do we address this future where we can have more autonomy. So if you look at the cities, for instance, around the world, as they evolve quicker than the infrastructure, what we call the peri-urban interface zone, there are many people without infrastructure, without proper sanitation, without access to water and electricity. But most of the world, it does not have access to water or electricity. And that world, the developing world, is emerging at a faster pace than the urbanized centers of the world. So how do we address water? And so the basic premise is, again, a distributed, localized system. That is inherently resilient because of the redundancy. If you have, let's say, an island and you have a hurricane event, these could be rapidly deployed. They can move from one side of the island, or they can move within an island chain to another island, and they could swarm. And so this is based on the concepts of anti-fragility, where you have this idea that stressors actually create benefits. Just like a tree, you can't restrict it, or else it won't build the fibers or your muscles in the human body without overdoing it or too little. You get a right combination of stress that actually creates benefits. And so we're really thinking about it in that way. So each WEDEW can provide localized energy, a high density electricity. It can provide water, a source of water. It can provide refrigeration, and it can provide storage in the form of batteries. And the form factor that we're using is in disused shipping containers. So we're taking a 40-foot container, we're breaking them up into 4 sections. Each segment of the WEDEW is based upon these alchemical elements of earth, fire, air, and water. And so they have the iconography of the triangles that form the graphics of the kind of WEDEW. And so you can think of it as an energy pod, a refrigeration pod, a water pod, and these can interlock and they can be used together. And because they're rapidly deployable using intermodal transport, they can go into a community. Now, when they're in a community, they form what we call a resilience hub. Instead of, for instance, in Africa where women and girls walk, 6 kilometers, an average a day, or potentially victimized, we could actually form a women's cooperative, a microfinanced local utility. And the idea is that once you have that utility, you now free up. There's a series of impacts that happen. Once you provide local electricity, you could have communications. If you have communications, you could have internet. If you have internet, you could have global learning, for kids. And these become these resilience hubs that we think can really transform communities.
Laura, do you have anything to add to that before I ask my next question?
No, I think we should go on.
Well, let's just say, though, that the brilliance in that is something that speaks to your particular path, both of you, but you especially, Laura, being very much about SDG 5, caring about women, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This was something that spoke to your heart because not only was it a brilliant innovation that could help humanity, but especially young women and girls who are usually the ones who are impacted by this lack of water, right? And that was something that really mattered to you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I really think that's an incredibly important aspect of this technology. As David said, women walk, millions and millions of women and young girls walk miles and miles every day just to get water for their family. And we feel that the WEDEW would help empower women. They would be closer to home. They wouldn't have to be far from home. And that their daughters can go to school and they wouldn't have to walk for water. Not only that, though, there's such an incredible educational component to this technology in every aspect. Atmospheric water, biomass gasification, agriculture there's a huge educational component to agriculture. I mean, farmers in the world are dwindling. People that know how to grow food are getting older and the populations are dwindling. And so we're going to be in trouble. Right. And so we need to really address women's issues together with food and water. Where are we going to be in 20 years from now? Do we want to keep on the same trajectory, or can we look at other avenues that could potentially help mitigate what we're all watching in real time happen?
Right.
So, and I also think too that women as part of this effort is going to be really powerful and really necessary. All of us. But women, we have a lot to bring to the table, and and especially in developing countries where women don't have access to education or jobs, right, or equal rights. And so, we really want to help empower women, and we feel that the WEDEW is a big part of that. Right. Well,
I'm really glad you could speak to that because I wanted to make sure you got that in. I knew that was extremely important to you personally.
It is, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And the fact that it can empower women and girls, and also, not just bring innovation and technology and education, but commerce, business, which is really important. So we're going to get into that. I want to understand more about how David, you explained it brilliantly, the different components, and so people can visualize what it looks like and understand how it all works together. We're going to wrap part 2 here, and we're getting to part 3. I want to dive into how that works. How does it work that someone can build back the utilities, the different types of ways that it can work, how someone can get into the WEDEW and buy it with grant support or that kind of thing. What does it cost? And then also we're going to touch on the Resilience Lab, which is kind of your new exciting venture as you're doing 2 things at once, which most purpose-driven innovators are doing, more than one thing at a time. So we'll get into that. But as we wrap part 2, why don't you quickly tell people where they can find you?
At skysource.org on our website.
And on Instagram and Facebook, our handle is at SkySourceWater.
Great. And everyone, you can also find that at the World on Purpose website, of course. And so please come back to listen to part 3. I think you're going to be very inspired if you're somebody who cares at all about, the scarcity of water that we have, which is a real problem, and the different kinds of things that are going on in the world. You're going to want to hear the rest of what David and Laura have to say about SkySource and WEDEW, which I love. I love that name. It is so symbolic. We do. So we do it together. And I think it's brilliant. And thank you for tuning in. Come back to part 3. I'm Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and we'll see you soon. Hello, and everyone. Welcome back to A World on Purpose. I'm your host, as you know, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. And I'm here to dive into part 3 of our 3-part series with Laura-Doss Hertz and David Hertz, founders of skysource.org. And their incredible WEDEW machine that they talked about, their atmospheric water machine, collection machine, that we have been really we completely dove into the nuts and bolts of how it works, the brilliance behind the design, David as an architect, and Laura with her background in storytelling, how they were able to take that and put this incredible design in front of the XPrize Foundation, which funds innovators and problem solvers around the world. And what did you say, David? The more audacious, the better. And so
achievable.
Audacious and achievable. So David and Laura, welcome back to part 3 of your 3-part series.
Thank you.
I mean, I've said before, I would be devastated if you didn't show up for part 3. That would be kind of a bummer. All right. So you two are genius. I love this idea. I think people, once they listen to it and hear, David, how you really explained it well, it wasn't so high-level science that I don't think anyone can understand how it works. So thank you for breaking that down for us. I'd like to dive in this segment into what you talked about in segment 2, which was how this machine, the WEDEW, the whole point of it is we do together in community, how people can buy into this machine. What does it look like? What's the cost? How a community can rally around it. How you've also touched on the fact that somebody who owns this, whether it's a farmer or a community or a business even that, is a manufacturer and uses a lot of water and energy, how they can actually build back the utilities, kind of like, a la solar has been able to do for people. So I'd love for you guys to start talking about that a little bit, if you could, so that if anyone's thinking to themselves, this sounds amazing, and how do I get in it? How do I get one for myself if they wanted to? What does it look like?
Sure, I could jump in on that. So from the XPrize, we really advanced the ideas of the WEDEW technology, but we're still in the productization phase. So this is not, a fully productized, piece where we have a price list. You just go online and order it. It's very specific. They're also somewhat customized to meet the needs of each community, because they're largely depending on the feedstock materials. And so we don't want to have unintended consequences where we're transporting feedstock long distances. That defeats the whole purpose. The whole idea is that it's a closed circular system where we're taking an abundant waste material. So just take California, where we are. There's over 2 million standing dead trees alone in California. There's an abundance of wood chips. You can see them piled up on the highway. Yeah. You can't give them away. We also have, one of the world's largest productions of coconuts, and other nuts, more like walnut shells and pistachio nuts. So how do we align ourselves right at the source with the biomass? Right. And then how do we, create a whole host of community benefits around that? So it starts first with, the local available resources, but also the local culture, climate, the appetite for buying water, for selling electricity. The basic concept of the WEDEWnomics, as we call it, is that this would basically be funded in large part by impact investment, much like this very success that you reference in the solar industry, the power purchase agreement. Mm-hmm. Many people would have a hard time in the barrier to entry and that first cost hurdle of buying the system. So we realize that. And so part of the idea is that a fund is created, an impact investment fund, which essentially covers the first cost of the equipment, of the WEDEW. Mm-hmm. We identify certain case studies working locally with local nonprofits that find the right combination of events that make it ideal for that community. And then for a very small payment, essentially a very minimal deposit, the WEDEW is basically provided under a lease agreement. Mm-hmm. And so they don't have the first cost. It can immediately start turning it into a micro utility that creates a little micro finance opportunity. So if we talk about, let's just say women and girls, instead of walking for water, let's say at their local school, there's a WEDEW. Now there's a local available feedstock. The instruments of service of the WEDEW, electricity, water, cold storage, and even biochar, which comes out, which we can talk a lot about, as this incredible benefit in soil revitalization. Those are all commodities that can be sold for community profit, and then from the profit, the investment impact fund has a return.
You were just explaining how the WEDEW works and how it can create this commerce and all these different things that an investment fund would get a return on their investment, while the community also is benefiting from the product, essentially. Biochar. You mentioned biochar. Let's talk about that for a second, so that people, especially if anyone who's in farming wants to know what that's about, especially organic farming. What is biochar, so people know what that means?
I am the biggest freak over biochar. It's definitely a rabbit hole that you can go down and get lost forever. Biochar is basically a byproduct of a material, any type of biomass waste material. In this case, the biochar that the WEDEW would be producing would be something like walnut shells or these standing dead trees in California. And so it's all about sequestering carbon. And so biochar is basically the sequestration of carbon. And so what it does in soil, as far as soil regeneration, is it's not really, it's kind of inert. It doesn't have any product except that it's like a sponge. So it's able to hold a lot of really beneficial bacteria and sugars and all the things that roots really need in order to thrive. And so when I saw the biochar in action at a community garden up in Northern California, they were doing this incredible biochar experiment where they were mixing it with their actual compost, and their compost was so rich and just so incredibly beautiful. I just can't even think of another word. It smelled like a forest. And so they did this experiment where they had on one side a garden, a crop that they didn't use any biochar. They just farmed it the way they normally do, and all organic. And then the other side with no pesticides or anything. And then on the other side was just the biochar that was mixed in that compost.
Wow.
And the difference between the two was phenomenal. It was like night and day. Even though you would look at this organic crop and think, wow, that's really beautiful, but you could see, insects and all, which are all great, but they're attacking the plants, and the plant doesn't have that strong of a defense as it would if it were to be if the soil were to be mixed with the biochar, and it lasts for a really long time, like forever, and it just basically holds all these really good bacteria, so the plant can kind of have the ability to build the strength on its own without using pesticides. And the problem with pesticides is that it's basically killing all the good bacteria. It's like taking antibiotics every single day for the life of that plant. And so it doesn't have its own immune system to fight off all the bad bacteria. Mm-hmm. So the thing that I love the most about what we're doing is the fact that everything is a circular, it's this endless cycle where nothing leaves and nothing comes in and nothing goes out, and it all stays within the system. So you're growing food, then you're composting the food, and then you're mixing it with the biochar that's coming into the garden.
You're watering it with sky source water.
That's right.
You're not pulling from municipalities.
Yeah, and like the idea and the vision is that one day it can be completely automated, where someone like me can just flick a switch and this operation can happen in my neighborhood, in my house. I mean, we're at the very beginning, but I feel like we're speaking to the future. Yeah, because there, in as much as I feel like we're moving forward, we're really moving backward to like the actual original way of farming and growing food is no pesticides and using nature and recycling and repurposing nature in order to grow more food that we can put back into the ground.
Right. I love that. I'm really glad you talked about that, because I think, we're having a lot of issues right now around the world, not just with water, but with food security, with food quality, soil quality.
It's all about a virtuous cycle. It all is about the cycle, and we're breaking that cycle with the way that we're growing in mass. Right. We can't sustain itself for how much longer. We're destroying all of our topsoil on the planet, and it can't last much longer.
Right. Well, I mean, this certainly sounds like a great solution for anyone, obviously, who's interested in farming anywhere that, they need commerce, they need water, they need anything that's going to create business for them. I think this is so brilliant. I do want to touch before we end our series in the next, so many minutes we have here, to talk about the other idea that you guys had around it, which is something new that came out of this, and that's the resilience labs. Yeah. And how important something like this is to disaster relief, because let's just face it, at least we live in California, right? And being in Malibu, Napa Valley here where I am right now, serious fires we've had in the last few years. And then we look at, what's happened in Puerto Rico and the hurricanes and everything else. And David, you talked a little bit about how this could help island nations and places too. But what about even like first world places that are having disasters like New Orleans when they had the hurricanes or that kind of thing? I'd love for you to talk about how this could really be a benefit, because water is a problem, obviously, for fighting fires and for all these other things. And I want you guys to touch about why that's so important to you guys and how this can be a mechanism to support disaster relief.
Sure. So, I've had the benefit of kind of studying and teaching on ecology and architecture, and I think anyone that is aware of the impacts that man has had on our planet, if you understand that we're the only living thing, that we have incredibly finite resources and we have profound impacts that can be lasting, and that within the next decade we have a decision to make as a species of whether we're going to be part of an extinction event. It's that real. And so the call to action really about that is very critical. And what we found is that, we're really driven by how can we lessen these impacts? And that could be, what's interesting in using this systems thinking is that we're addressing decarbonization, we're addressing soil revitalization, food. Our technologies exist within these large spheres, the hydrological cycle and the carbon cycle. Mm-hmm. But they're at the nexus of food, water, and energy, which is where it's absolutely critical for us to survive, as a species. And what we found was that there's a host of these benefits that stack up. And that's how the Resilience Lab was based. We've never really achieved sustainability. Now we're in the age of resilience. How do we as a species become resilient to an increasingly difficult planet where there's going to be competition for limited resources. The United Nations alone looks at the next 8 to 10 years where demand for water is going to outstrip supply by 40%. We're going to be short energy, we're going to be short water, and we're going to be short food. And so how do we become smart enough in our thinking about our resources that we can't just continue to have a linear process that creates a cascade of negative benefits? So the Resilience Lab came about. Let's say we just talked a little bit about biochar. Well, biochar is this amazing substance, but it can also be incredible as an activated charcoal for water filtration. We've got one of the scientists we work with has been crushing that to make graphene, and within graphene he's making graphene batteries. Looking at biochar for a self-cleaning, fire retardant soil, so that if you activate decomposition of soils and you have leaf litter that would normally create a fire, that if it's self-cleaning, then that minimization of fire is very critical. So that those are just some examples of these amazing verticals. So the idea is that it becomes a incubator, a foundry to take these, to stack these different verticals with CEOs, with capital, and to expand these technologies all under the idea of resilience. How can we create resilient technologies? And we keep finding that the deeper we go, the wider the opportunities become.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, and it seems to me that if these could be everywhere, and maybe even somehow government mandated, in some way, there would be a lot of water for firefighters. There would be, these resilience hubs you want to do for just, it seems like the vision would be in every community. In case something happens, it's there. In case something goes down, they've got it. And I really love that idea.
And the whole point of it is that all this is, when there is no disaster, that they remain nimble. So they remain in use. And there's, plenty of people that are working around the clock that have the skills to run these machines and to create. This is the whole part about job creation, is that you have it so it's nimble. So in the event that something happens, it can either be ready to be deployed or it can be used right there.
I love it.
Yeah, so the idea is that they're in a stasis. The steady state is for self-reliance.
Right.
But they contribute to climate adaptation as a system because they all stack together, and then they swarm for disaster relief when needed.
That's incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? I've said intelligent and brilliant a couple times, but it just is. I mean, it's the idea that something like that can have
too. It's common sense. It seems to me that something like this would be, widely accepted, because it's like, hey, well, that makes total sense to implement that and kind of have it, swarmed everywhere and
Yeah, what was nice is we just last week, in terms of general acceptance, the WEDEW was named as one of the top 100 time inventions.
I saw that.
So that was nice too, because it is an acknowledgement that, okay, we get it, like a lay person can get it. This is an invention, and it was for, societal benefit, social benefit. And that's, is really what moves Laura and I, is the impact that it can have on communities and individuals as we become more resilient. And we're just a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of our understanding. But unfortunately, people often move very slowly in there as they process, they go through denial and many steps before they get to acceptance.
It's the Ben Franklin syndrome.
Well, yeah, Ben Franklin, as it relates to water, it had a famous saying that said that you don't understand the value of water until the well runs dry.
Yeah.
But that's a good metaphor for so many other things, whether it's our food systems and other things. And so
you don't think about the consequences until it's gone. Obviously. What was that?
I think you don't really understand the consequences until it's actually happening to you.
Right, exactly.
Right now in real time, where we're not prepared.
Right.
And so to be, we don't really normally behave that way. We don't react. We don't act until it's time to react.
Right. I agree with
you. Either you get on the bus or you end up under it.
That's definitely one way to say it. Okay, on that note, we only have a few minutes. I know your time schedule is crunchy and so is mine, but this is so ingenious. I just love all of it, and I just love the way the two of you have come together on this. I just wanted to, before we do the quick call to action, which we really need to make sure we know people what you need at SkySource, I just wanted to touch on one little thing, if you would indulge me. I asked the Custos this question, or I posed this to the Custos if you saw me interview Philippe and Ashlyn Cousteau. What I love about the two of you is that you guys get to do what you love with the person that you love. And I'm sure it isn't always easy. It isn't easy when you're doing it with a partnership in general, but what's the one little nugget you could tell people about creating a life-changing kind of business company idea that you have that's this big, hairy, audacious goal together? And if there were a challenge that you guys had met together, how you guys kind of steer the course, stay on course, and support each other through it?
I'd like to answer that. Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing, if you're, in a partnership, is that you need to respect the cause. Mm-hmm. Egos aside, I know it's really hard sometimes to bite your tongue, or, you're going to have disagreements, and that's okay. That it would be weird if you didn't have disagreements, but the end goal and looking toward the future and what you can create together as a force, as opposed to winning or being right, that doesn't really matter. That all, to me, should go out the window, because the main goal and the cause and the possibilities of what you're trying to do good in the world should be the most important thing. That's the prize for me. Whenever things get tough, you look at the end goal and you keep your eye on the prize, and you always respect the cause first.
And one of the things that's nice about, as you say, biting your tongue, is that if you have a partner, you can bite your partner's tongue.
Well, that's probably the most awesome phrase I've heard said yet on this show. Brilliant. Well, thank you.
But, seriously, I think that in any endeavor that you're going to do that's a passion, what better way than to do it with the person that you're passionate about? And it's a unifier that, where you have a common goal, whether it's something bigger than ourselves. And, by doing something that you love to do, you learn about yourselves in the process, and that can be destructive or it can be nurturing. We've really looked at it in the same way that we talk about the, positive, cascade of events that happen. Sure. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to build on our relationship and to expand it. And we haven't really, self-actualized yet. This has been a lot of design, a lot of concepts, a lot of theory, but to get out there and implement these global case studies and have Laura, as Chief Impact Officer, really documenting that, getting the feel and getting into the whole kind of cultural, societal, benefits, and showing those benefits is really where the joy is going to be. There's been a lot of effort to get to that point.
That's great. Well, you guys are certainly a magical couple and have come a really long way. And I know it's been hard. You had to do things that you didn't think you'd have to do to make this stuff happen, and you did it. And so I am convinced that you will make this happen. And that brings us to our call to action. What is it that SkySource needs in order to bring this into the fruition? I know you can do pilot projects and things like that with people, but in a large scale way, let's just call it out there. What is it that they need?
I'll jump in on that. Yeah. With anything, with any venture, we need capital. We need capital to do it. We need seed capital for an initial round that would help build our management team. We're both passionate about it, but we also have our other things in life we want to oversee. We know that we need somebody that's like a top CEO that can execute on this. It's going to help drive this forward. We want to build our management team. We want to build out our IP. We want to expand our product roadmap and development. That's going to take some seed capital. And then we will look at doing a Series A, growth round that would then, really build the fund to get that out there, both for the Resilience Lab. We have our Resilience Foundation, so that for family offices or foundations that would like to make an impact grant, they can do it through a nonprofit. But also we have our for-profit. We see this as a for-profit entity, a profit for purpose entity, but it's community profit driven that becomes the engine that can expand it. So that's kind of what our asks are, and we've been working with the XPrize, working with YPO, we've been working with many organizations, and that's our next step.
Great. That's great. And yeah, for anyone out there who's an impact investor, family office, anyone who understands something, the insurmountable odds that it would have come to try to get this to where it is now, and the incredible impact that it could make, please contact David and Laura. I think this is something that, obviously congrats on the Time Magazine Top 100 Innovations of the year. I think that speaks a lot to what you guys have created. And I would love so much for anyone to see this, to be able to reach out to David and Laura and help bring this to its next phase so we can get this out into the world. David and Laura, thank you so much for being on my little show, my dream. It means a lot. Thank you. It means a lot to me.
You.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm glad I got to see you, and I'll come back and visit you guys soon. You have a room for me at Xanadu, right?
You do.
Okay, good. I'm ready for a little jaunt somewhere. So thank you. And for everyone who's tuning in to World on Purpose, thank you again for coming back. Hopefully every week you're enjoying all these incredible humans that are doing something for the greater good, something larger than themselves. And that speaks a lot to the kind of humans they are. Hopefully they'll inspire you to find your pivot to purpose. And I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and I really thank you guys all for tuning in. David and Laura, have a great day, and
Thank you.
We will see you all soon.
Okay,
Bye.
great.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you for taking this journey into a world on purpose with our incredible guests. To learn more about our amazing guests and their inspiring purpose-driven work, please go to aworldonpurpose.com. Don't forget to look at our call to action of the week to mobilize your desire for purpose into action. A World on Purpose can be found on Apple Podcasts and all the major podcast platforms, and the video version can be found on YouTube. If what you heard today inspires you, please write a review and like and share on the platform of your choice. We'd love to also hear from you and learn your pivot to purpose and the meaningful work that you do that lifts humanity. Send your stories to info@aworldonpurpose.com. I'd like to thank our World on Purpose team for making this show a reality. Once again, I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. Thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose. I look forward to seeing you soon.